The blue glow of my laptop screen cast shadows across the cluttered workshop as I hunted through lines of code, searching for the bug that had been haunting my latest project for 3 days straight. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows of our 2-story colonial, and I could hear Ava's voice drifting down from the kitchen above, sharp and animated as she talked on the phone. "Mom, you said it yourself. Dad's basically a fossil. You deserve someone who actually gets you. Derek's hot, successful, and he's definitely not some basement-dwelling loser." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I froze, my fingers suspended over the keyboard. That was Zoe, my 17-year-old daughter, her voice carrying that particular brand of teenage cruelty that could slice through steel. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but it was the silence that followed, Ava's lack of defense, that really twisted the knife. "Honey, it's complicated," Ava finally replied, her tone softer but not disagreeing. "Your father and we've grown apart. Derek makes me feel alive again." Derek. The name had been popping up in conversations for months now. Ava's personal trainer at the upscale gym downtown, 29 years old, all abs and protein shakes, with the kind of confident smile that made middle-aged women forget they had mortgages and teenagers to worry about. I pushed back from my workbench, the chair wheels squeaking against the concrete floor. Around me, the detritus of 20 years in software development cluttered every surface: circuit boards, prototype devices, towers of technical manuals, and 3 different coffee makers because I could never remember which one actually worked. This basement workshop had been my sanctuary since we'd bought the house 15 years ago. It was where I'd built the small software company that kept us comfortable, where I'd designed the inventory management system that half the retail stores in our mid-sized Michigan town now used. It was also where I'd been tinkering with something bigger, a revolutionary point-of-sale integration platform that could change everything. But apparently, while I'd been down here building our future, my wife had been upstairs planning her escape. The floorboards creaked above as footsteps moved across the kitchen. I could picture the scene perfectly. Ava in her designer yoga pants and oversized sweater, her auburn hair pulled back in that effortlessly messy bun she'd perfected, while Zoe sat at the island scrolling through her phone, probably posting something sarcastic about her embarrassing father. "I just think you deserve better," Zoe continued, her voice carrying that self-righteous tone that reminded me uncomfortably of my mother-in-law. "Derek's got his own business. He drives that awesome BMW, and he actually cares about staying in shape." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Unlike your father, the 45-year-old software architect who'd apparently let himself go. Never mind that I still hit the boxing gym 3 times a week, or that my letting myself go consisted of having a few gray hairs and preferring comfortable clothes to whatever fashion statement was trending this week. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step bringing their conversation into sharper focus. By the time I reached the kitchen door, I could see them clearly through the gap. Ava leaning against the granite counter we'd saved 2 years to afford, while Zoe sat perched on a stool, both of them looking like co-conspirators planning a heist. "The thing is," Ava said, glancing toward the basement door, "your father's not a bad man. He's just stuck. He's been doing the same thing for 20 years, living in the same routine, dreaming the same small dreams. I need more than that. More than that. More than the house I'd worked 60-hour weeks to buy. More than the successful business I'd built from nothing. More than the college fund I'd been contributing to since Zoe was born, or the retirement account that was finally starting to look respectable. I stood there in the doorway, invisible to them, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something worse, the crystalline clarity that comes when you finally see a situation for what it really is. "So, what are you going to do?" Zoe asked, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. My own daughter, thrilled at the prospect of her parents' marriage imploding. "I don't know yet," Ava replied. "Derek thinks I should talk to a lawyer, just to understand my options." Derek thinks. Of course he did. I wondered how many of these conversations they'd had, how long this had been building while I'd been obliviously debugging code and planning our next family vacation. I backed away from the door and retreated to my workshop, moving with the careful quiet of someone who'd just discovered they were living with strangers. Back at my laptop, the cursor blinked patiently in the middle of my code, waiting for me to solve the problem at hand. But the real problem wasn't in the software. It was upstairs, planning my replacement. I opened a new browser window and navigated to my email, fingers moving with mechanical precision. If Ava was talking to Derek about lawyers, if she was making plans behind my back, then maybe it was time I did some investigating of my own. Her email password hadn't changed in 5 years. Zoe 2008, the year we'd bought the house and thought we were building something permanent. The inbox opened like a door into a world I didn't recognize. The messages were all there, a digital trail of betrayal that went back 4 months. Photos that made my stomach clench. Messages that detailed encounters in places I recognized. The Riverside Motel where we'd stayed during our anniversary weekend 3 years ago. The parking lot behind Derek's gym. Even our own bedroom while I'd been traveling to client sites. But it was the most recent exchange that really got to me. Derek. "Babe, you know I'm right about this. Julian's holding you back from everything you could be. You're too amazing to be stuck with someone who doesn't appreciate you." Ava. "I know. It's just scary, you know? 20 years of marriage and Zoe to think about." Derek. "Zoe's practically an adult, and she sees it too. She told me herself that she thinks you deserve better. As for Julian, honestly, Ava, what's he ever really done for you? That little software business of his is going nowhere, and he's too comfortable to ever take real risks." Little software business. Too comfortable to take real risks. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Derek had no idea about the patent application I'd filed 6 months ago, or the 3 major corporations that had been circling around my point-of-sale platform like sharks around chum. He didn't know about the meeting I had scheduled for next week with a venture capital firm out of Detroit, or the preliminary offer that was sitting in my lawyer's office, waiting for my signature. But then again, neither did Ava. I'd wanted it to be a surprise, a grand gesture that would prove I wasn't the small-dreaming, stuck-in-a-rut husband she apparently saw me as. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I scrolled through more messages, each one a small cut, that added up to something much larger. They'd been planning this for months, not just the affair, but the exit strategy. Derek had been coaching Ava on what to say to a divorce lawyer, how to document my workaholic tendencies and emotional unavailability. They'd even discussed how to turn Zoe against me more effectively. "Make sure she understands that you're doing this for her future too," Derek had written. "Julian's the kind of guy who'll never give her the opportunities she deserves. You need to be with someone who can provide the lifestyle you both should have." The lifestyle we both should have. I looked around my workshop at the evidence of 2 decades of steady, unglamorous success. Apparently, it wasn't enough. My phone buzzed with a text message. Ava from upstairs. "Working late again? Dinner's ready?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Be up in a minute." But I didn't move. Instead, I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing, my fingers moving with the same methodical precision I used for debugging code. If Ava and Derek wanted to play games, if they thought I was just some comfortable, predictable obstacle to be managed and discarded, then maybe it was time they learned exactly who they were dealing with. Julian Tate, the boring software architect who never took risks, was about to become very interesting indeed. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October drizzle that made everything look washed out and depressing. I sat in my car outside Phil's boxing gym, watching the early morning crowd filter in through the glass doors, construction workers grabbing a quick workout before their shifts, a few dedicated retirees, and the hardcore regulars who treated the place like a second home. Phil Kowalski had owned the gym for 30 years, ever since he'd retired from a brief but memorable career as a light heavyweight. He was 65 now, built like a fire hydrant with hands that could crack walnuts, and he'd been listening to my problems for the better part of a decade. If anyone could help me figure out my next move, it was Phil. The gym smelled like sweat, leather, and the industrial-strength disinfectant Phil used to keep the health department happy. I found him in his usual spot behind the front counter, reading the sports page and drinking coffee from a mug that had seen better decades. "Julian," he said without looking up, "you're early today. Something eating at you?" I grabbed a pair of gloves from the rack and started wrapping my hands, the familiar ritual giving me something to focus on besides the mess my life had become. "You could say that. Wife troubles." Phil had an uncanny ability to read people, probably developed from years of watching fighters telegraph their punches. I wasn't surprised he'd cut straight to the heart of it. "Something like that." I finished with the wraps and moved toward the heavy bags. "How'd you know?" "You've got that look. Same one I had when my ex-wife decided she needed to find herself with her yoga instructor." Phil folded his newspaper and leaned back in his chair. "Want to talk about it? Or are you just here to beat the hell out of something?" I threw a few tentative jabs at the bag, testing my range and timing. "Both, probably." "Fair enough. But let me give you some advice, son. Don't make any big decisions when you're angry. Anger makes you stupid, and stupid gets you in trouble." For the next hour, I worked out my frustrations on the heavy bag, throwing combinations until my shoulders burned and my shirt was soaked with sweat. Phil watched from across the gym, occasionally calling out corrections to my form or reminding me to keep my guard up. It was exactly what I needed. Simple, physical, uncomplicated. When I finally stopped, gasping and dripping, Phil wandered over with a towel and that knowing look that meant he was ready to dispense some of his hard-earned wisdom. "Feel better?" "A little." I wiped my face and started unwrapping my hands. "Phil, what would you do if you found out your wife was cheating on you?" He considered the question seriously, the way he approached everything. "Depends on what I wanted the outcome to be. You looking to save the marriage or end it?" "I honestly don't know anymore." "Well, that's the first thing you need to figure out, because the strategy's different depending on the goal." Phil leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "If you want to save it, you confront her, you go to counseling, you try to rebuild trust. Messy, painful, but sometimes it works. And if I don't, then you get smart. You document everything, you protect your assets, and you make sure you come out the other side in one piece." His expression hardened slightly. "But you do it clean, Julian. No revenge fantasies, no trying to get even. That stuff always backfires." I nodded, but even as I did, I could feel the cold anger from the night before settling deeper into my bones. Getting even was exactly what I wanted to do. "The thing is," I said, pulling my gym bag over my shoulder, "I don't think she wants to save it. I think she's already moved on." "Then you know what you need to do." I drove home through the gray morning, Phil's advice echoing in my head. Get smart, not angry. Document everything. Stay clean. It was good advice, the kind that would keep me out of trouble and help me navigate the divorce with my dignity intact. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw Derek's BMW parked on the street at 8:30 in the morning, while I was supposedly at work, something darker took hold. I parked in the garage and entered through the kitchen, moving quietly out of habit, rather than any real attempt at stealth. The house was silent, but I could hear the faint sound of voices coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. This time, I didn't hesitate. I climbed the stairs with purpose, each step bringing me closer to a confrontation I'd been avoiding for too long. The bedroom door was closed, but I could hear them clearly now. Ava's laugh, Derek's deeper voice, the unmistakable sounds of intimacy. In my own bed, in my own house, while my daughter was at school and I was supposed to be safely out of the way. I stood outside the door for a moment, listening to my wife and her lover plan my replacement, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Phil's advice about staying clean and getting smart was probably right, but it assumed I was dealing with people who had some basic level of respect for me. These people had no respect for me at all. I turned and walked back downstairs, moving with the careful precision of someone executing a plan. In my workshop, I opened my laptop and began making copies of everything, every email, every photo, every message that documented their affair. Then I opened a new browser window and began researching divorce attorneys. But that was just the beginning. While I worked, I could hear them upstairs, their voices carrying through the old house's thin walls. Derek was explaining to Ava how easy the divorce would be, how Michigan's no-fault laws meant she wouldn't have to prove anything, how she could probably get alimony and half of everything I'd worked for. The key is to establish that he's been emotionally unavailable, Derek was saying. Document his work habits, his isolation, the way he prioritizes his business over family. Make it clear that the marriage failed because of his neglect. Emotional unavailability. Neglect. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. The man who was sleeping with my wife in my own bed was coaching her on how to paint me as the villain in our divorce. I saved my work and closed the laptop, then climbed the stairs again. This time, I didn't hesitate at the bedroom door. I knocked once, firmly, and waited. The silence that followed was profound, the kind of quiet that comes when people realize they've been caught red-handed. After a moment, Ava's voice, shaky and uncertain. "Julian, I thought you were at work." "Change of plans," I said through the door. "We need to talk." More silence, then the sound of frantic movement, clothes being grabbed, whispered conversations, the general chaos of people trying to cover up something that was already exposed. When the door finally opened, Ava stood there in her robe, hair disheveled, trying to look casual and failing completely. Behind her, I could see Derek sitting on the edge of my bed, pulling on his shirt with the kind of arrogant calm that told me he thought he was in control of this situation. "Julian," Ava said, "this isn't what it looks like." I stared at her for a long moment, taking in the scene, the rumpled sheets, Derek's clothes scattered on my bedroom floor, the guilty flush on my wife's face. Then I started laughing, a sound that surprised all three of us. "Actually, Ava, it's exactly what it looks like. And you know what? I'm glad I finally see it clearly." Derek stood up, pulling on his shoes with that confident swagger that had probably charmed dozens of bored housewives. "Look, Julian, maybe we should all sit down and talk about this like adults." "Adults?" I nodded slowly. "That's interesting advice, coming from someone who's been sneaking around behind my back for 4 months. His confident expression flickered slightly. "How did you know about the affair? The emails? The planning sessions where you two figured out how to destroy my marriage and steal my assets?" I stepped into the room, and both of them took an involuntary step backward. "I'm a software architect, Derek. I'm very good at finding information." Ava's face had gone pale. "Julian, please let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been documenting my emotional unavailability for your divorce lawyer. How you and your boyfriend have been coaching my daughter to hate me. How you've been using my own bed to plan my replacement." The silence stretched between us, heavy with 20 years of marriage and months of deception. Finally, Derek cleared his throat, apparently deciding to try a different approach. "Look, man, I know this is hard, but maybe it's for the best. You and Ava want different things. She needs someone who can give her the life she deserves. The life she deserves. I repeated the words slowly, tasting them. And you think you can provide that? I think I can provide things you can't, Derek said, and there it was, the arrogance I'd been waiting for. I'm building something real, Julian. My fitness business is expanding, I've got investors interested, I'm going places. Ava deserves to be with someone who has ambition. I nodded thoughtfully. Ambition. That's important. Exactly. So tell me, Derek, in all your ambitious planning, did you ever think to ask Ava about my patent application? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Both Ava and Derek looked confused, which told me everything I needed to know about how much my wife had actually shared with her lover. What patent application? Ava asked. I smiled, and for the first time in months it felt genuine. The one that's about to make me very, very rich. The confusion on their faces was almost worth the months of betrayal. Almost. What are you talking about? Ava demanded, her voice taking on that sharp edge she used when she felt like she was being left out of something important. I leaned against the doorframe, suddenly feeling more relaxed than I had in weeks. Remember that little software business Derek's been so dismissive of? Turns out it's not so little anymore. Derek's confident expression was starting to crack around the edges. What do you mean? I mean that while you two have been playing house and planning my downfall, I've been in negotiations to sell my point-of-sale integration platform to Retail Max Corporation for $167 million. The silence that followed was beautiful. Ava's mouth actually fell open, while Derek looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to him in ancient Greek. That's impossible, Ava said finally. Your business, it's just local stores, small clients. Local stores that became regional chains that caught the attention of national corporations that are very interested in the kind of seamless integration my platform provides. I pushed off from the doorframe and walked to the window, looking out at Derek's BMW. The preliminary contracts were signed last week. Final closing is scheduled for next Friday. You're lying, Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the email from my attorney, then turned the screen toward them. The Retail Max letterhead was clearly visible, along with the dollar amount that had been keeping me awake at night for all the right reasons. Ava sank down onto the bed, staring at the phone like it might bite her. $167 million? Give or take a few million in taxes and legal fees. I pocketed the phone and turned back to them. Funny thing is, I was planning to surprise you with it. Thought maybe we could take that European vacation you've been talking about, maybe look at getting a place on the lake. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. While Ava had been complaining about my lack of ambition and my small dreams, I'd been quietly building something that would set us up for life. While Derek had been sneering about my little software business, I'd been negotiating the kind of deal that most people only dreamed about. Julian, Ava said, her voice suddenly very different, softer, pleading. We need to talk. Alone. Derek stood up abruptly, apparently realizing that the dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically. Maybe I should go. Yeah, I said, not taking my eyes off my wife. Maybe you should. He gathered his things quickly, shooting nervous glances between Ava and me. At the door, he paused, probably trying to think of something to say that would salvage the situation. Instead, he just mumbled something about calling later and disappeared down the stairs. Ava and I listened to his footsteps, then the sound of the front door closing, then his BMW starting up and pulling away. Only then did she look at me directly. Julian, I know how this looks. It looks like my wife has been sleeping with another man in our bed while planning to divorce me and take half of everything I've worked for. I sat down in the chair by the window, suddenly feeling exhausted. How exactly should it look? I was confused, lonely. You've been so focused on work, and Derek made me feel alive. Yes, I heard. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. The question is, what happens now? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. The woman who'd been ready to leave me an hour ago was now faced with the reality that her boring, unambitious husband was about to become very wealthy. I want to save our marriage, she said finally. Do you? Or do you want to save your access to $167 million? The question hit home. I could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way she looked away from me. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Ava, you've been cheating on me for 4 months. You've been turning our daughter against me. You've been planning to divorce me and take half of everything I've built. And now you want to talk about fair? People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. This was a campaign. I stood up and walked to the dresser, where framed photos of our family stared back at me. Vacation pictures, birthday parties, anniversary dinners. All of it felt like evidence from someone else's life. You and Derek had a plan, Ava. You documented my flaws, coached Zoe to resent me, and prepared to paint me as the villain in our divorce. The only thing that's changed is that you found out I'm worth more than you thought. She was crying now, but I felt nothing. The tears that would have moved me a week ago just looked like another manipulation tactic. What do you want me to say? She asked. I want you to tell me the truth. If I were still just a small-time software developer, if there was no patent sale, no windfall, would you still want to save our marriage? The pause before she answered told me everything I needed to know. I don't know, she whispered. I nodded, feeling something final settle into place. At least you're honest about that. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. I'm going to stay at Phil's place for a few days, while I figure out what comes next. I think we both need some space to process this. Julian, wait. But I was already walking away, down the stairs and out of the house that no longer felt like home. Behind me, I could hear Ava calling my name, but I didn't look back. Phil lived in a small apartment above his gym, a Spartanly furnished space that reflected his no-nonsense approach to life. When I showed up with a duffel bag and a story that sounded like something out of a soap opera, he just nodded and pointed to the couch. Beer? He asked. God, yes. We sat in his small living room, drinking beer and watching the afternoon light fade through his single window. I told him everything, the emails, the affair, the patent sale, the confrontation. Phil listened without interrupting, occasionally grunting or nodding, but mostly just letting me get it all out. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So what's the plan? He asked finally. I don't know. Part of me wants to forgive her, try to rebuild. 20 years of marriage, you know? That has to count for something. And the other part? I took a long pull from my beer. The other part wants to make sure she never gets a penny of that money. Phil nodded slowly. Both reactions are normal. Question is, which one's going to win? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a series of them coming so fast that the phone couldn't keep up. Ava, please come home. We need to talk. Ava, I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Ava, Derek means nothing to me. You're my husband. Ava, think about Zoe. She needs her family together. Ava, Julian, please, I love you. I showed the messages to Phil, who read them with the expression of someone examining evidence at a crime scene. She's scared, he said. Yeah. Scared people do desperate things. As if to prove his point, my phone rang. Ava's name appeared on the screen, along with a photo from our last anniversary dinner, both of us smiling, looking happy and secure in our life together. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. On the 4th call, I finally answered. Julian, thank God. Ava's voice was breathless, panicked. I've been trying to reach you for hours. I got your messages. Please come home. We need to talk about this properly. I can explain everything. What's to explain? You're having an affair, Ava, with a man who thinks I'm a loser and has been coaching you on how to destroy me in a divorce. It's pretty straightforward. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I looked out Phil's window at the parking lot below, where my car sat next to a handful of others. Normal people living normal lives, without the complications of betrayal and windfall fortunes. The question is what we do about it. We fight for our marriage. We go to counseling. We rebuild trust. Do we? Or do you just want to make sure you're still married to me when the patent money comes through? The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I thought she might have hung up. I deserve that, she said finally. Yes, you do. But Julian, I'm asking you to look past what I deserve and think about what we both want. Do you really want to throw away 20 years over a mistake? A mistake. 4 months of planning and betrayal, reduced to a mistake. I'll think about it, I said, and ended the call. Phil was watching me with the patient expression of someone who'd seen this movie before. You're not going back to her, he said. It wasn't a question. No, I realized as I said it. I'm not. Good, because she's not sorry about the affair, Julian. She's sorry about getting caught. He was right, of course, but knowing that and acting on it were two different things. 20 years of marriage doesn't end with a single decision, no matter how clear-cut the situation might seem. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Ava. It was Zoe. Dad, where are you? Mom's freaking out and she won't tell me what's going on. I stared at the message, thinking about my daughter and the role she'd played in all of this. The things she'd said about me, the way she'd encouraged her mother's affair, the casual cruelty that teenagers were capable of when they thought they were on the winning side. Tell your mother I'll be home tomorrow to discuss next steps, I typed back. Are you guys getting divorced? The question hung on my screen like an accusation. I thought about lying, about trying to protect her from the consequences of the adult drama she'd helped create. But Zoe was 17, old enough to understand that actions had consequences. That's between your mother and me, I replied. But you might want to ask her about Derek. I turned off the phone and looked at Phil. I'm going to need a good lawyer. I know just the guy, Phil said. Nasty son of a bitch, but he gets results. Good, because I have a feeling this is going to get ugly. Outside, the October evening was settling over the city, bringing with it the promise of a long, cold winter. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could see clearly. The game had changed, and it was time to start playing by new rules. The law office of Marcus Linton occupied the top floor of a glass tower downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. Linton himself was exactly what Phil had promised, a sharp-dressed predator in an expensive suit who looked like he could smell weakness from 3 blocks away. So, he said, leaning back in his leather chair after I'd finished explaining the situation, your wife's been cheating, planning to divorce you, and coaching your daughter to hate you. But she doesn't know about the patent sale yet. She knows about it now. I told her yesterday. Linton's eyes lit up with the kind of professional interest that probably cost $500 an hour. How did she react? Suddenly wants to save the marriage. Of course she does. He opened a legal pad and started making notes. The good news is that Michigan recognizes adultery as grounds for divorce, which can affect alimony decisions. The better news is that you discovered the affair before the patent money officially changes hands. What does that mean? It means we have options. The sale closes next Friday, correct? I nodded. If we file for divorce before then, we can argue that the patent and its proceeds are separate property, developed during a period when your wife was actively working to undermine the marriage. Linton's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. It won't eliminate her claim entirely, but it could reduce it significantly. And if we wait, then the money becomes marital property, and she's entitled to half, minus whatever we can claw back for the adultery. The mathematics of betrayal, laid out in billable hours and legal precedent. I thought about Ava at home, probably calling Derek, probably trying to figure out how to salvage her position now that the stakes had changed so dramatically. "There's something else," I said, and told Linton about the emails, the planning sessions, the way they'd been documenting my supposed flaws for months. His smile got even sharper. "You have copies of these communications?" "Everything. Mr. Tate, I think we're going to get along just fine." I left Linton's office with a strategy, a timeline, and a retainer agreement that would have bought a nice car. But as I drove through the city streets, past the familiar landmarks of 20 years of married life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Control. My phone had been buzzing constantly since morning, texts from Ava, missed calls, voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as the day wore on. I'd ignored them all, but as I pulled into Phil's parking lot, I decided it was time to start setting some boundaries. "Julian, thank God," Ava answered on the first ring. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I've been busy." "Doing what?" "We need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward." "I've been talking to a lawyer." The silence on the other end was profound. "A lawyer? Julian, please, don't do anything rash. We can work through this." "Can we? Because I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about not knowing if you'd want to save the marriage, if there was no money involved. That was pretty enlightening." I was confused, emotional. I didn't mean... "You meant exactly what you said, Ava. And you know what? I appreciate the honesty. It makes the next part much easier." "What next part?" I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. "I'm filing for divorce." The sound she made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Julian, no, please. Think about what you're doing." "I have thought about it. I've thought about 4 months of lies, about you sleeping with another man in our bed, about you turning our daughter against me. I've thought about all of it. And I'm done." "What about Zoe? What about our family? What about them? You were willing to destroy both for Derek's abs and his BMW. Don't pretend you care about family now. That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, and it felt good. "Ava, you forfeited any right to talk about fair when you started planning my replacement." "The money's changed you," she said, and I could hear the anger creeping into her voice now that the pleading wasn't working. "You're being vindictive." "The money didn't change me, Ava. It just gave me options I didn't have before." "So what? You're going to punish me for making a mistake?" "I'm going to protect myself from someone who's shown me exactly who she really is." I ended the call and turned off the phone. Upstairs, Phil was waiting with beer, and the kind of silence that meant he'd heard enough of the conversation to understand how it had gone. "Feel better?" he asked. "Actually, yes." "Good, because it's about to get worse before it gets better." He was right, of course. Over the next few days, Ava pulled out every weapon in her arsenal. She enlisted her friends to call me, pleading her case and painting me as a cold, unforgiving husband who was throwing away a good marriage over a momentary lapse in judgment. She had her mother call, her sister, even our old pastor from the church we'd stopped attending 5 years ago. But the real surprise was Zoe. She showed up at the gym on Thursday evening, looking uncharacteristically uncertain as she stood in the doorway scanning the room for me. When she spotted me at the heavy bag, she walked over with the kind of careful approach people used around dangerous animals. "Dad?" I stopped punching and turned to face my daughter. She looked older somehow, like the events of the past week had forced her to grow up faster than she'd planned. "Zoe, what are you doing here?" "Mom told me you're filing for divorce." "That's between your mother and me?" "No, it's not." Her voice was stronger now, more like the confident teenager I was used to. It affects me too, and I want to know why you're doing this. I unwrapped my hands slowly, buying time to think about how to answer. Zoe had been complicit in her mother's betrayal, but she was still my daughter, still 17 years old and trying to navigate a situation that would challenge adults twice her age. Your mother had an affair, I said finally. For 4 months, she lied to me, lied to you, and planned to leave our marriage for another man. When I found out, I decided I couldn't trust her anymore. Zoe's face flushed. But she wants to fix it now. She realizes she made a mistake. Does she? Or does she realize that leaving me would cost her a lot of money? You think she's only staying for the money? I think your mother made her feelings about our marriage very clear when she was sleeping with Derek and coaching you to hate me. The words hit home. Zoe looked away, suddenly very interested in the gym floor. I never hated you, she said quietly. No? Because I distinctly remember you calling me a fossil and a loser, and telling your mother she deserved better. I was angry. You're never around, you're always working, and when you are home, you're thinking about work. I was working to build a future for this family. While I was doing that, your mother was planning to destroy it. But now you have all this money, and you could fix everything. You could quit working so much, spend more time with us, make Mom happy. I stared at my daughter, seeing so clearly how she'd been manipulated into believing that this was somehow my fault, my responsibility to fix. Zoe, let me ask you something. If your boyfriend cheated on you for 4 months, lied to you, humiliated you, and planned to leave you for someone else, would you take him back just because he suddenly realized you had something he wanted? She was quiet for a long moment. That's different, she said finally. How? Because you're married. You made vows. Yes, we did. Both of us. And your mother broke hers. Tears were starting to form in her eyes, and I felt my resolve waver slightly. Whatever else had happened, Zoe was still my daughter, and seeing her cry still hit me in the chest like a physical blow. Dad, please, can't you just try? For me? It was the question I'd been dreading, the one that cut through all the legal strategy and financial planning straight to the heart of what this was really about. My daughter asking me to sacrifice my self-respect and my future happiness for the sake of a family that had already been destroyed by her mother's choices. Zoe, I said gently, I love you more than anything in the world, but I can't stay married to someone who doesn't love me, doesn't respect me, and has shown me that she's willing to betray everything we built together. That's not a marriage worth saving. But the money doesn't change what she did. It just makes her more interested in hiding the consequences. She stood there for a moment, looking lost and young and confused. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling like I'd just failed some crucial test of fatherhood. But as I thought about the alternative, staying in a marriage built on lies and maintained by financial incentive, I knew I'd made the right choice, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The next morning, Linton filed the divorce papers. By noon, Ava had been served. By evening, her lawyer had called to request a meeting. The war had officially begun. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room that smelled like leather and bad coffee, with Ava and her lawyer on one side of a polished table, and Linton and me on the other. It felt like a hostage negotiation, which, in a way, it was. Ava's attorney was a woman named Patricia Grady, with steel gray hair and the kind of professional demeanor that suggested she'd been through this particular dance many times before. She opened with what I assumed was her standard conciliation speech about the benefits of mediation and the importance of considering the family's best interests. Linton listened politely, then slid a thick folder across the table. These are copies of the communications between Mrs. Tate and her lover, he said in the tone of someone discussing the weather. 4 months of planning, documentation, and coordination. They detail not only the affair itself, but also a systematic campaign to undermine Mr. Tate's relationship with his daughter and to build a case for divorce that would maximize Mrs. Tate's financial settlement. Grady opened the folder and began reading, her professional composure slipping slightly as she took in the scope of what Ava had been doing. Across the table, Ava sat perfectly still, staring at her hands. These communications also include detailed discussions of Mr. Tate's supposed character flaws, Linton continued, documented for the express purpose of supporting claims of emotional neglect and abandonment. What they don't include is any mention of the patent application that Mr. Tate filed 6 months ago, or the pending sale that will net him over $160 million. Grady looked up sharply. Mrs. Tate, did you know about this patent application? Ava's voice was barely audible. Julian never told me about it. Because I wanted it to be a surprise, I said. I thought my wife would be happy to learn that her husband had built something valuable. I was wrong. The timeline is crucial here, Linton said, pulling out another document. The affair began 4 months ago, well before Mrs. Tate had any knowledge of the patent's value. The divorce planning began 3 months ago. The patent sale was negotiated over the past 6 weeks, during which time Mrs. Tate was actively working to end the marriage. Grady was scanning through the emails, her expression growing more grim with each page. Mrs. Tate, some of these communications are quite explicit in their discussion of financial strategy. I was confused, Ava said, finally looking up. Derek was telling me things, making me think. Derek Hoffman, Linton said, consulting his notes. Age 29, personal trainer, currently facing bankruptcy proceedings related to his fitness business expansion. A man with significant financial motivation to pursue a relationship with a soon-to-be wealthy woman. The words hung in the air like an accusation. I watched Ava's face as the implications sank in, saw the moment when she realized how completely she'd been manipulated. Mrs. Tate, Grady said carefully, given the documentation Mr. Linton has provided, I need to ask you directly, do you want to save your marriage, or do you want to pursue a divorce settlement? It was the same question I'd asked Ava days earlier, but coming from her own lawyer, it carried a different weight. This wasn't about emotions or family anymore. This was about strategy and money and the cold mathematics of dissolution. Ava looked at me across the table, and for a moment I saw something that might have been the woman I'd married 20 years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, maybe even sorry. I want to save my marriage, she said. No, I replied. You want to save your access to my money. Julian, please. Mrs. Tate, Grady interrupted. I think we need to discuss your options privately. Mr. Linton, could we have a few minutes? Linton and I stepped out into the hallway, leaving Ava alone with her lawyer. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see them having an intense conversation, Grady apparently explaining some harsh realities about divorce law and documented adultery. How do you think she'll play it? I asked. She'll fight, Linton said. The money's too big to walk away from. But those emails make it almost impossible for her to claim the marriage was salvageable. We're in a very strong position. When we returned to the room, Ava looked like she'd been crying. Grady's expression was professionally neutral, but I could see the resignation in her posture. My client would like to propose a settlement, Grady said. I'm listening. Mrs. Tate will accept a no-contest divorce in exchange for a lump sum payment of $20 million in the house. I almost laughed. $20 million for 4 months of adultery and betrayal? Julian, Ava said, her voice sharp with anger, I gave you 20 years of my life. And I gave you 20 years of mine, plus the financial security that's making this conversation possible. The difference is, I wasn't planning to throw it all away for someone half my age. The house has significant sentimental value, Grady said, trying to steer the conversation back to business. And Mrs. Tate will need time to establish herself independently. The house is worth maybe $400,000, Linton replied. And Mrs. Tate had 4 months to think about establishing herself independently while she was planning this divorce. The negotiations continued for another hour, with numbers flying back and forth across the table like artillery shells. 15 million, 10 million, 5 million plus the house and alimony. Each offer was met with counteroffers and legal precedents and reminders of what the emails revealed about Ava's motivations. Finally, I'd had enough. "Here's my offer," I said, standing up. $2 million, the house, and she keeps her car. In exchange, she signs a non-disclosure agreement about the patent sale and agrees to joint custody of Zoe with no child support. "That's insulting," Grady said. "It's generous," Linton replied. "Given the documentation of adultery and the evidence of premeditation, we could argue for much less." Ava was staring at me like I'd become a stranger. Maybe I had. $2 million, she said slowly, for 20 years of marriage. $2 million for 4 months of betrayal, I corrected. The 20 years of marriage ended when you started sleeping with Derek. And what if I don't accept? Then we go to trial, and a judge gets to read all those emails out loud in open court. Your affair becomes public record. Your daughter gets to hear the details of how you plan to destroy her father, and you probably end up with less money and more humiliation. The silence in the room was deafening. Through the windows, I could see the city going about its normal business. People working, living, dealing with ordinary problems that didn't involve patent sales and adultery and the systematic destruction of families. "I need time to think about it," Ava said finally. "You have until Monday," I replied. "After that, the offer expires, and we let the judge decide." As we left the conference room, Ava caught my arm. "Julian, wait. Can we talk? Privately?" I looked at her for a moment, this woman I'd been married to for 2 decades, and felt nothing but exhaustion. "What's left to say, Ava?" "I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I'm sorry." "Are you sorry about the affair, or sorry that you got caught?" "Both. I'm sorry about all of it." I nodded slowly. "I believe you. But sorry doesn't fix this. It could be a start." "No," I said. "It's too late for starts. This is the end." I walked away, leaving her standing in the hallway of a law office, surrounded by the wreckage of the life she'd chosen to destroy. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of winter and new beginnings. I drove back to Phil's gym, where he was waiting with beer and the kind of silence that meant he understood exactly how the meeting had gone. "So?" he asked. "She'll take the deal," I said. "She doesn't have a choice." "And how do you feel about that?" I thought about the question, surprised to realize that I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret, just a kind of empty relief, like the feeling you get when a long illness finally breaks. "Free," I said. "I feel free." My phone buzzed with a text message from Zoe. "Mom told me about the meeting. I hate you." I showed the message to Phil, who read it and shook his head. "She'll come around," he said. "Kids usually figure out the truth eventually." "Maybe. Or maybe she'll hate me forever for destroying her family." "You didn't destroy anything, Julian. You just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." On Monday morning, Grady called Linton to accept the settlement. By Wednesday, the papers were signed. By Friday, the patent sale closed, and I was officially wealthy beyond anything I'd ever imagined. That evening, I sat in Phil's apartment, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, I'd been a small-time software developer with a comfortable marriage and a teenage daughter who tolerated me. Now I was a multi-millionaire divorcee whose family had imploded in spectacular fashion. My phone rang. Ava's name on the screen. "I'm moving out this weekend," she said without preamble. "I wanted you to know." "Okay. Zoe's coming with me." "That's her choice." "Julian." She paused, and I could hear something in her voice that might have been regret. For what it's worth, I really am sorry. I know you are. Do you think we could have made it work? If things had been different? I thought about the question, about the woman I'd married and the people we'd become over 20 years of shared life. Maybe, I said, but things weren't different. After she hung up, I sat in the silence of Phil's apartment and tried to figure out what came next. I had more money than I could spend in a lifetime, a daughter who hated me, and a future that was completely undefined. For the first time in months, that felt like exactly what I needed.